And Julian had called me up and been like, and said, look, there's an opportunity, if you ever thought of, working on the other side of the fence. Um, Finger 11 is launching a new record called Them Versus You Versus Me, and we're doing a tie-in with Much Music. And they're going to send 5 contest winners across the country in an RV to report live from the show every night. After they're done doing these reports, they're going to work for Wind Up Records and create content for the Finger 11 Street Team. What do you think about going out and shepherding these kids along? And maybe while you're out there, you'll decide whether you like the idea of working with bands as opposed to in them. And if you pay close attention to the guys on the Finger 11 crew, you might learn something or else. So I was like, yeah, I literally have absolutely nothing to do. So I hugged my wife and said, I'm going back on the road. She said, you're doing what now? It's like, yeah, I'm gonna chaperone contest winners and drive an RV across Canada. And the nice thing about being in a van and trailer band for 15 years is you get really good at driving across Canada. So they hooked me up with Ron Morse, Jamie Appleby, and Jared Goldberg, who were at Wind Up Records Canadian division at the time. And they handed over the keys to a brand new GMC RV that had been wrapped with the Finger 11 artwork and another band called Strata, who was the other band on the tour. And we piled the 5 kids in there and off we went. I think the second day I scratched the paint off the side of the RV. And the third day, one of the girls got her purse stolen. But after that, it was pretty smooth sailing. And
besides those 2 things, it was all smooth.
Besides those 2 things, I brought the kids back and everyone had tattoos. So there were probably people who weren't super impressed.
Chaperone of the year. Yeah. Chaperone.
Yeah. And, it was awesome in a way. And it really kind of set the tone for me is seeing these kids who these kids, they're in their 20s. I'm like 4 years older than them. Like, they're not kids, but I refer to them as kids. Seeing these kids that had never been out on tour before and kind of taking them on tour and letting them experience all of the things that happen on tour, which is, never ending drives and long nights and no sleep and crap food and, giggling hilariously at things that don't make sense because you're delirious and all of the other fun things that happen, the after show and the camaraderie and the sense of achievement when you get home after your first time out, across the country, like, we did it. And it really was like, yeah, I had a lot of long talks with a guy named Wade Butland, who was Finger 11's front of house engineer at the time, and Kevin Nicol, who was their tour manager, about the ins and outs. And I bonded a lot with a guy who was my friend until his death, Alan Riches, who was Rick's tech at the time, about that side of the gig. And, I remember talking with Wade and saying, like, ask yourself this question. Even though you're not playing the music, do you still like the work? And I was like, I think I do. I think I do like the work. Yeah. I think I could do this. I'm going to be a tour manager, I said to myself out loud at some point. And I think Kevin Nicol heard me and started laughing and said, be careful what you wish for. By the way, go run this meet and greet for me. So I went out and we did that tour and it ended. And there was talk of me maybe staying on to assist, but they didn't have budget and I didn't have an American work visa. But Rob Laney reached out and said, hey, we've got this singer-songwriter, acoustic R&B singer. He's 17. His name is Justin Nozuka. He just put out a record called Holly. We got him a deal in the UK and it's starting to take off. Do you think you would be interested? He's like, it's only going to be maybe a couple of weekends here and there. I can't really guarantee it's going to be much. That ended up being like 3 years and like 3 times around the world we took that. And it was another one. Like, I can't thank, the guys at Coalition and Davey and everyone in that office and Justin and his family for giving me that opportunity. I would have never expected to be on my 29th birthday being in a band that's falling apart, and on my 30th birthday sitting in a production office in Utrecht, Netherlands, running a show for a 17-year-old kid who's got a runaway success of a record. And you know, watching him go through that whole process that I went through, but seeing him have success and seeing him being able to just absorb it and keep going and not have it change who he was as a person. And we did a lot of miles, man. Me and the guys in that band. Mark Pellitzer, who's in the band Magic now, was Justin's guitar player and keyboard player. Alice Tansichuk was the drummer, and Anthony Lavdansky was the bass player. All college level educated musicians, incredible players. And you know, we built a really great little crew around this band. Ryan Haynes was my production manager and front of house engineer. Brendan Horn was a lovely guy from London, Ontario, lighting guy. And our merch guy was Anthony's childhood friend from the Bronx. Anthony was from Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, but went to the university in Toronto. But his buddy, little Nicky Cambiotti, was our merch guy, and he was everything you wanted him to be. You know, he was this little New Yorker with a huge blowout hair and always, you know, making moves. And we took that, we ran that for a long time, man. And it was wild to go from 0 back to 100 in the span of like a few months.
Yeah, you'd consider that probably your first big break behind the scenes.
Yeah, on that side of the fence, it was, you know, and it wasn't just the work. It was like, you know, he was really poised for some major success, you know, like we did all the shows, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, David Letterman. I got to meet David Letterman. I got to scare the crap out of Paul, his musical director, because I had joked about it and been like, hey, I've been on your street. And he looked at me. He's like, what did you say? I was like, yeah, there's a street named after you in Thunder Bay. He's like, oh yeah, that's really funny. I was like, okay, so I shouldn't talk to people.
Really that's where the Junos happened as well, where I saw you with Justin Nozuka.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so there was Junos in there, and I was such a fan of Justin Nozuka and that album Holly that for that Christmas I bought 5 copies of Holly and I put it in the stockings of every family member of mine. That's how much I love that album. And
the guy who produced that record, a gentleman named Bill Bell, is just a fantastic. He plays guitar for Jason Mraz and a few other people, and he makes great records. And what he was able to capture, you know, was just literally unbridled passion. And that was the thing about Justin. Like, if he was going to go out there to sing, he was going to give you 150% day in, day out, you know, like he was just so game to do it on Holly, to get out there. And, you know, there was a night we were on a US run, and I think we were on our 18th show in a row. And I kind of pulled him aside, was like, are you okay? Like, are you all right with this? Like, we're pushing you pretty hard here, man. Like, we're doing 21 shows in 24 days. You know, and then we're flying somewhere to do talk show, whatever. Like, are you cool? And, you know, he was like, yeah, man, like, I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to give it the try. And, you know, the kid worked so hard, and the band guys, you know, because out of the gate, man, like, we made tons of mistakes as a crew. You know, the band didn't. They were always spot on, but I screwed up all kinds of stuff. You know, the first time you go to Switzerland, you're like, I have to do what now? You know, like the first
you're
time
in charge of like the directions and travel and flight.
Yeah, like, you know, like, and it was this thing, like Eric and Rob were just willing to give me a chance, you know, and Justin was willing to give me a chance and just say, all right, man, like, I think we can do it. You know, the first time I went to the UK, we had a British front of house engineer, Larry Hibbett, who's now a really successful record producer. And that was the only time we went out of there, when we went over outside of Canada without all Canadian or American crew guys. And, you know, the second time we went over, it was me and Ryan Haynes, who was our front of house engineer. And the first thing we had to do was split up. And I went to Austria with the band, and I went to Austria with like Justin and Mark, and he went to the United Kingdom with the rest of the band guys, and then we met back up. And the first thing we had to do once the group was back together was take the overnight ferry from Dartford, England to Hook of Holland. And we got off the ferry in the Hook of Holland. I turned on the GPS, and it didn't work because it was a UK only GPS in our little van. And it was like, okay, what do we do? No Google Maps on your phone, no iPhone, and we literally randomly drove around until I found a car dealership where somebody spoke English. And they said, "Oh, well, there's a media market right here," which is their version of like Future Shop. And I bought a Dutch GPS that worked for all of Europe, and off we went.